Look, if you know Palworld, you've played it, or you've at least heard of it at some point, you already know what the deal is. And you probably also know about the lawsuit that Nintendo filed against Pocket Pair, the studio that made the game. Because yeah, it didn't take long after launch before that whole thing kicked off, and the reason is obvious if you've been paying any attention at all. Nintendo just does this, man. They see a game with cute little creatures you need to catch, and here comes a lawsuit. They see those creatures battling each other, and here comes a lawsuit. They see them being used as mounts, and here comes a lawsuit. Nintendo is genuinely famous for suing literally everyone for literally any reason, and Palworld was basically standing in the middle of the street with a giant target on its back just asking for it. But here's the thing. Years after this whole mess started, we finally have a major update on what's actually happening, because the website Games Fray, which has been closely following what's going on with this case in Japan, put out an update on June 11th saying that Nintendo essentially has no realistic chance of winning against the current versions of Palworld. And even if they do somehow squeeze out a win on something, the most they should get is a laughably small settlement of $30,000. $30,000. Nintendo, the untouchable giant, the company that everyone in gaming is terrified to even look at wrong, is losing to Palworld. Like, what? That's wild, man. That's a real turnaround. So here's where things actually stand right now. Both parties, Nintendo and Pocket Pair, have already completed their submissions of allegations and evidence, which basically means neither side can bring anything new to the table anymore. Everything is locked in. The final court presentation is scheduled for the 1st of October 2026, with a decision coming in November of the same year. And the most important detail here, the thing that really tells you everything, is that Nintendo itself has already confirmed that going forward, their claims will only apply against old versions of Palworld, meaning they have no effect on the current state of the game whatsoever. And by the way, Palworld is about to hit its official version 1 on July 10th of this year. So Nintendo looked at what Pocket Pair has been doing, saw there was nothing left to fight on, and even their own lawyers had to admit there's no path forward here. And that limits everything from here on out, because by admitting that their claims have no legal standing against the current game, Nintendo is basically confessing that they badly overplayed their hand. Also important, because of all of this, Nintendo isn't getting any injunction with any real impact on what Pocket Pair does going forward either. An injunction is a court order that can force someone to do something or stop them from doing something. In practice here, either the courts recognize Nintendo was wrong, which blocks them from going after Pocket Pair again, or the injunction basically tells Nintendo they can't legally do this to other games with similar mechanics. Either way, Nintendo's hands are tied, and developers and players can actually breathe a little for once. And the amount Nintendo could receive in the best case scenario? Practically symbolic, $30,000, which is a ridiculous fraction of what Nintendo has probably already spent just on lawyers dragging this thing out, as long as they have. Because if you don't remember, Nintendo's original demands were genuinely aggressive, man. Like, really aggressive. They wanted Palworld to just be wiped from existence entirely. That was the real goal. Nintendo straight up declared that if they won, Pocket Pair would need to pull Palworld from every platform and destroy every copy of the game, including merchandise, t-shirts, any collaboration already made or in progress. Nintendo was so set on that outcome, they were willing to obliterate the entire game just to make sure nobody could challenge their throne. That's insane to me, honestly. But why so intense about it? It's simple. It's about Pokemon. As a brand, Pokemon is the most lucrative property in the world right now. It eclipses even the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all of Disney. Nintendo could literally just make Pokemon games for the rest of its existence and still be a multi-billion-dollar company indefinitely. So yeah, this mattered to them a lot. But here's the thing, it wasn't even because Palworld was actually cutting into their territory. Palworld isn't available on Nintendo platforms. It probably won't be in the future either. You can play it on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, completely outside the Nintendo ecosystem. So the issue was never really about competition in any practical sense. It was just greed. They didn't want anyone to have an alternative to Pokemon, because that would mean even a single dollar going somewhere other than Nintendo's pocket. And that's the most cynical part of all of this, honestly. Palworld's existence wasn't going to hurt Pokemon's sales. They weren't even on the same platform. Nintendo just didn't want you to have a choice. If you wanted a creature-catching game, You'd either buy into the latest Nintendo ecosystem or you'd have nothing. That's it. It's all about money and dominance, and Nintendo genuinely thought they could just wave their enormous wallet around and control everything. Except that's not how it works anymore, man. Now, it gets even more revealing when you understand why that $30,000 number is so low. The 3 patents involved in this lawsuit were registered and published sometime after Palworld had already launched, which drastically limits the damages window and only captures a small slice of more recent sales. Palworld launched in January 2024, selling something like 12 million copies right out of the gate, one of the biggest launches of a new IP in gaming history. But Nintendo was too slow. They didn't activate the patent in Japan and filed a lawsuit in time to capture that initial boom. The patent was activated shortly after launch, and only then did they file. So they basically missed the entire period when the vast majority of copies were actually sold. It's bleak for them, man. It's like someone opens a McDonald's, then sees a Burger King open on the next block and do well, and then runs to file a patent claiming only McDonald's hamburgers can exist in that city. Like, you just can't claim ownership of a concept because you're suddenly facing competition. That's not how any of this works. And making it even worse for Nintendo, Pocket Pair moved fast. Within days of the legal trouble starting, they pushed out an update that removed the Pokeball equivalents, removed the creature catching mechanics, removed the mount mechanics, exactly the mechanics cited in the lawsuit as infringement. Smart move either way, honestly. If Nintendo won, they'd only collect money relative to copies sold up to that point with no claim on future sales. And if they lost, Pocket Pair already had the mechanics removed without major damage since players had adjusted to playing without them anyway. And this also means the damages are territorially restricted to Japan because a Japanese patent only applies in Japan, an American patent only applies in America, and the vast majority of Palworld players are outside Japan, which makes complete sense when you remember that the developers themselves said years ago that the only reason they put guns in the game was to appeal to the American market because, their words, Americans love guns. So even if Nintendo had somehow won the whole case, they could only recover damages tied to sales in Japan during that incredibly short window between the patent activation and the update removing the infringing mechanics. Days or weeks at most. It's practically nothing compared to the massive revenue the game pulled in at launch worldwide. And there's more, because Nintendo might not even see those $30,000, because they'd still need to defend their patents against the invalidity claims Pocket Pair filed, prove actual infringement happened, and then prove that real damage was caused by that alleged infringement. The Games Fray article describes this amount as pocket change for both parties, insignificant compared to what Nintendo has already spent on litigation. In practice, Nintendo only has something to lose here. That's the situation they put themselves in. And then to make their position even worse, it came out that Nintendo tried in April 2026 to file more patents on the American side, reaching a total of 26 variations of the same basic idea. All of them were rejected by the American Patent Office, which classified the attempts as non-original. The Patent Office used Nintendo's own patent history against them to prove these claims were just remixes of concepts that already existed filed in bad faith. It's like someone put stickers on a phone and claimed it was now a completely new product. You look at the phone with stickers on it and it's still just the same phone. This proves the legal strategy never had a solid foundation from the start. And the loss here isn't just financial, it's reputational, man. And honestly, that might be the part that hurts Nintendo more than anything. The company was always that untouchable giant that everyone was afraid to cross, and now they're losing to Palworld. It's hard to defend Nintendo in a situation like this, even if you love their games and their franchises. And the deeper problem is genuinely concerning, because what Nintendo was trying to do was own concepts that are just far too generic in game design. If they had succeeded, we'd eventually reach a point where Nintendo effectively owned practically everything. No more racing games, no more creature catching games, no more mount mechanics, nothing. They'd just file a patent and use lawsuits to block all competition indefinitely. And that would have been bleak, man, really bleak. That's why this defeat matters so much for the industry as a whole. If Nintendo, one of the biggest publishers in the world, with generational wealth, practically no debt, and the only major publisher not currently struggling to put out exclusive games at a reasonable cost, couldn't even convince Japanese courts they were right, what chance does any other aggressive publisher have of pulling something similar? This opens the door in the best possible incredible way for any studio to create whatever game they want without living under the constant threat of abusive lawsuits over mechanics that should belong to everyone. Does this mean more Pokemon-style games are coming? Yeah, without a doubt. And that's going to sting Nintendo hard, because for years they've been putting out mediocre, sometimes below mediocre Pokemon games, knowing people would buy them anyway because there was simply nowhere else to go. The fact that Pokemon Legends ZA sold something like 6 million copies in a single week, a number that surpasses Crimson Desert's lifetime sales across all platforms combined, shows that Nintendo understood exactly what they were sitting on. They never had to innovate, never had to deliver what fans were actually asking for, because there is no real alternative anywhere. That's also why Pokemon games now come at full price instead of the lower cost they used to carry. Modest development budgets, billions in returns every year. Why change anything? But now Palworld is free to grow and do whatever it wants, including, in theory, adding mechanics similar to gym badges, and Nintendo has lost any legal foundation to go after Pocket Pair again in the future. If they couldn't convince anyone that they owned the concept of the Pokeball or creature summoning, there's no way they win by claiming ownership of earning badges or anything similar. And that creates a troubling precedent from Nintendo's perspective, because now players actually have a real alternative outside their ecosystem. Palworld launched at $40, and as it moves toward version 1, it's essentially going to stay that same price with all new content and DLCs included. Meanwhile, Pokemon games release at full price, and expansion passes alone, like the Pokemon Legends ZA, one cost practically the same as all of Palworld, just for the expansion, on top of the full game you already paid for, and Nintendo has never cared about that. The Pokemon Sword expansion pass is still sitting at $40 years after launch, on top of the full game price, and their attitude has always basically been, what are you going to do about it, pay up or go without? Except now there's actually something to do about it, because if Palworld costs the same as a Pokemon expansion pass and offers more content plus free updates on top of that, Nintendo's going to need to genuinely rethink that whole business model to make sure their fan base doesn't start pushing back or just quietly moving on. Because honestly, Nintendo has been taking advantage of Pokemon fans with this pricing model for years. The only reason it worked is that there was no real competition. That might be changing now. At its core, what Nintendo was trying to communicate through all of this was a very simple message: don't challenge the king. They believed they could pull it off, being one of the most aggressive defenders of intellectual property in the entire industry, a company that almost never loses legal fights. But looking at where things are now, this isn't a one-off failure in patent selection or legal strategy. It's a vulnerability in Nintendo's entire approach to innovation as a concept. With Palworld, they found themselves facing something they genuinely hadn't dealt with in a very long time: a competitor in their space who wasn't playing by their rules. And they didn't know what to do with that. And honestly, I think the real reason Nintendo was so furious wasn't that Palworld was copying Pokemon. It's that Palworld was delivering exactly what fans have been asking for from a Pokemon-style game for years: a bigger world, survival mechanics, base building, actual multiplayer, more freedom in general. Whether you personally like Palworld or not, one thing became obvious fast: people were very interested. That's why this story hit such a raw nerve. It wasn't about the guns or the visual similarities to Pokemon. It was about pent-up demand that had been sitting there for years waiting to be met. Pokemon had gotten too predictable, too comfortable, and Palworld showed what happens when you take something familiar and actually push it somewhere new. That's what made Palworld dangerous in Nintendo's eyes, not because they were going to lose revenue, but because the game challenged the whole narrative that nobody actually wanted alternatives to Pokemon. Turns out, they did. They very much did. And that's why this story resonated with so many people, including those of us who cover this stuff, because nobody saw this as Nintendo protecting creativity or innovation. It was just Nintendo being vindictive, trying to limit what other studios could do or build. And the moment they made that move, a lot of people started looking at Nintendo differently. And it's really hard to blame them. In the end, all Nintendo accomplished was generating more support for Palworld, turning what should have been a routine legal dispute into a full-blown battle over what innovation in this industry is even allowed to look like. And that's exactly why they lost so much goodwill in the process. At the end of the day, this entire thing is about the industry as a whole. Palworld proved something that executives at major publishers genuinely did not want to hear: that players will in fact walk away from established brands if someone comes along and offers something more exciting somewhere else. And that should alarm whoever is in charge, not because they're going bankrupt, but because it shows that consumer loyalty is never, ever guaranteed, no matter how large or powerful you are. You can't rely on legacy, nostalgia, and brand recognition forever. At some point, people are going to want something new. And when they can't get that from whoever holds the original brand, someone like Pocket Pair is going to show up and meet that demand, and there's nothing you can do about it. Palworld didn't destroy Nintendo. It's not going to replace Pokemon. But that's not really the point, is it? What matters is that Palworld exposed a vulnerability running through the entire gaming industry, the belief that mega corporations can coast indefinitely on established brands while letting innovation take a back seat. And Pokemon fits that description perfectly, man. The only reason the franchise's games moved toward open worlds at all is that fans complained and demanded it relentlessly for years. Otherwise, Nintendo would have happily kept delivering the same thing over and over with no major changes, because the billions were coming in regardless. Why fix what isn't broken, right? The reason Palworld exploded wasn't because it was a perfect game. It definitely wasn't. It was because it offered something that players felt they hadn't been getting anywhere else for a very long time. And that's the lesson every publisher should be sitting with right now. When a relatively small studio like Pocket Pair can create a game capable of shaking one of the biggest companies and intellectual properties in the world, that's not just a cool success story. That's a loud warning that success is no longer guaranteed for anyone. These companies need to keep generating real value if they want to keep pulling in billions the way they used to. Otherwise, people are going to look elsewhere. And no matter how powerful you think you are, even if you're Nintendo, that loyalty can never be taken for granted, ever. We'll see how it all plays out in October and November when the case is finally decided. But from everything out there right now, it's basically over for Nintendo in this lawsuit. They lost, they're not winning. There isn't much more they can do to change that. And honestly, good. Palworld won, competition came out stronger, and the market gets a little freer for other studios to make Pokemon-style, Zelda-style, Mario-style games without living under the constant threat of abusive lawsuits over concepts that should never have belonged to anyone in the first place, least of all Nintendo. Now we just have to hope other companies don't try to pull the same move down the road. Because if the only strategy you've got is suppressing or erasing the competition, which is literally what Nintendo tried to do here, it's time to rethink everything. Nintendo lost, and everyone who values having actual options in this industry won right along with them. If you like the video, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps more than you know. Share it with a friend too. It means a lot. Hope you're all doing well out there. See you in the next one, and until next time.